Part 75. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 741. The moon is on the branches. On the small street in the south of the city, the brothels and gambling houses that were once full of laughter have all closed down. The small street is silent, and only the night watchman occasionally enters the window of the inn and hears the slight footsteps. A lot of things happened today, so much that it feels like a long time has passed. It was not until the middle of the night that Zhongli Chuchu took a bath and changed her clothes, and lay on the bed exhausted. Then she remembered that she came to the capital this morning, and only half a day had passed. After running around all day, her body was very tired, and she didn't even want to move her hands, but Zhongli Chuchu couldn't sleep. However, the inability to sleep was not due to the spring of the girl's heart. Although it was indeed embarrassing and annoying to hold Su Buling's finger in her mouth in the evening, Zhongli Chuchu didn't have the heart to think about those things when she was lying on the small bed in the inn. She couldn't sleep because she was moved by the scene and remembered the past. When she was a child, she was locked in an iron cage like an animal by human traffickers, and then put in a dark carriage by a matchmaker. After several changes of hands, she traveled thousands of miles and came to the thousands of mountains in Nanyu. The place where she settled was not far from this inn. At that time, she was only a few years old, with a hemp rope tied to her hands, standing barefoot in the yard, looking at the majestic city outside the wall that she had never seen before, with no surprise in her eyes, only uneasiness. In fact, an orphan like her who was born in a foreign and wild land is not as valuable as a pound of fat meat in the wilderness. Even if she lives in a brothel here, she has gone from hell to heaven. This is also why the little girl who was sold with her would study skills so diligently, because in a brothel, no matter how difficult it is, she will not be beheaded like an animal for no reason. However, compared with the singing girl who makes a living by selling smiles, Zhongli Chuchu still wants to be a person, a free person with a family. So after entering the courtyard near the inn, Zhongli Chuchu tried very hard to please the housekeeper, and tried every means to learn everything she could, hoping to find a chance to escape from there. In fact, now that I think about it, I was still too naive at that time. As the saying goes, whores are heartless. How could the housekeeper of a brothel really have feelings for the girls under her? Those smiles were just appearances. She was only a few years old, and no matter how many tricks she played, she could not escape from that street. Therefore, Zhongli Chuchu only felt grateful and attached to the master who took her away and made her a human being again, especially when she was lying here. If there was no master, she might also be lying in the city at this time, lying in another house not far away, but what she experienced might be completely another world. Zhongli Chuchu opened her eyes and looked at the moonlight on the window paper. As her thoughts deepened, she became more and more sleepy. At this time, she wanted to get into the arms of her master like when she was a child, and enjoy the hard-earned warmth and peace. It's a pity that the person lying in the master's arms must be another person now. Ah! Zhongli Chuchu sighed faintly, no longer sleepy, so she sat up, put on her dress, and walked out of the room slowly. There were not many people staying in the inn, and it was late at night and the lights were turned off. Zhongli Chuchu walked towards the fence along the street on the second floor, wanting to see the moon. When passing by the door next door, he stopped and listened. "You idiot, aren't you Eagle Finger Sanren? Show me your eagle now." "Ah, husband, I was wrong. I have two hands, and even if I don't have hands, I still have a mouth. Do you know you are wrong to dare to be presumptuous in front of your husband?" "I know I am wrong, I know I am wrong, ah." "Don't be so loud, Chuchu is listening outside the door." Zhongli Chuchu was stunned, and quickly moved his cheek away from the door, whispering, I was just passing by, master, you should rest early, don't be too tired." "Chuchu, I was just chatting with him, I didn't do anything else." "Really, you can do something else, I won't disturb you. Zhongli Chuchu responded softly, and did not disturb his master's good deeds anymore. He quickly left the door and came to the fence on the second floor near the street. The silver moon is like a hook, and the sky is full of stars. Zhongli Chuchu stood by the fence for a moment, and suddenly realized that there was nothing to see. But if she turned back to the house at this time, she would disturb her master, and she probably wouldn't be able to sleep. After a slight hesitation, Zhongli Chuchu gently jumped up, leaned against the porch column, sat on the fence, and took out the ice flower hibiscus pendant and two small bells from her waist. The embroidered shoes kicked the hem of her skirt and swayed in the air. The bells made a subtle sound as they rubbed. Zhongli Chuchu's cat-like green eyes shone with a little luster, and she might not even understand the meaning. 3 people living together. How should they live? They have been together for a long time, but Chuchu has not found her position so far, especially after coming out with Su Buling this time. She feels a little redundant. In Chang'an, she took Su Buling to kill herself. In Suzhou, Su Buling created the Black City for the sake of the Jade Pendant. In Jiangnan, Su Buling destroyed the bandit camp alone. In Yuzhou, Su Buling went to the government office alone to save her. Even to this day, she is still a stumbling block between Su Buling and his master. Thinking back from the beginning to the end, she seems to have never done anything valuable. Her martial arts are not as good as King Yi, her literary talent is not as good as Yufu, her personality is not as good as Manzi, and compared with the older sisters, she is far behind. She seems to have nothing but beauty, the hottest body, the whitest skin, and the prettiest eyes. Well. Zhongli Chuchu leaned against the pillar, looking at the jade pendant in his hand, lost in thought. I don't know how long it took, but there were footsteps behind me. Then a familiar man's breath came from behind, passed around her shoulders, and she looked down. Zhongli Chuchu held the jade pendant and bell tightly, and squeezed gently with her shoulders. What are you doing here? Go and stay with master. I want to be quiet. Su Buring was wearing a robe and still holding gauze on the middle finger of his right hand, but he was already fine. With a smile on his lips, he leaned behind Chuchu and told an old joke with a hint of jealousy. Who is Jing Jing? Male or female? It was obviously the first time for Zhongli Chuchu to hear such a wise crack. She wanted to explain, but in an instant she realized that Su Buling was teasing her. She tightened her dress slightly and said calmly. Male, childhood sweetheart, it has nothing to do with you, just go back. Su Buling had just finished serving Jeju and was kicked out by Jeju to coax Chuchu, so naturally he was not in a hurry to go back. He thought for a moment, raised his hand, hugged Chuchu, and rested his chin on Chuchu's shoulder. Really? This posture is obviously too intimate, even a bit presumptuous. Chuchu sat on the fence, her back pressed against Su Buling's chest, her body stiffened slightly. Then he tilted his head in annoyance. What you do? Su Buling came to South Vietnam for another purpose, which was to settle the relationship between Chuchu and Juju. Otherwise, Juju would be like a frustrated little daughter-in-law every day, and Chuchu would be dejected and not good to each other. Chuchu had already expressed his feelings for Su Buling, and Su Buling didn't play hard to get tricks. He put his arm around Chuchu's waist and pulled her in a little. Chuchu, have you thought clearly? Zhongli Chuchu squeezed a few times with his shoulders and realized that Su Buling was different from usual. He felt a little panicked and frowned. What should I think clearly? Su Buling looked serious. The 3 of us will live together from now on. You think beautifully. Zhongli Chuchu didn't look at Su Buring. She just lowered her head and clasped her fingers at her waist, trying to struggle out of her arms, but her movements were not very forceful. Su Buring hugged her for a moment, then suddenly leaned close to Chuchu's ear and blew lightly. Chuchu was so excited that half of her body was numb. Her face turned a little red. She gritted her teeth and whispered, "What are you doing? You. Taking advantage of you is disrespectful." Su Buletinling responded frankly, then leaned over and kissed Chu Chu on the cheek. The two have known each other for more than 2 years, probably only a few days shorter than Man Zi King Yi, but the most intimate contact they had with each other was just holding and carrying each other, and they had never experienced such a thing as kissing. Zhongli Chuchu trembled suddenly and almost screamed, then quickly covered her mouth, her green eyes full of panic and consternation. She quickly took out the poisonous needle from the leg ring under her skirt and turned her head to stab it. But before he could make a move, his wrist was held, and he was pulled into Su Buling's arms, and his lips touched something soft. Zhongli Chuchu was caught off guard, his eyes widened, staring at the face that was so close that he could not see clearly, and he completely stiffened. The moonlight was still and the streets were silent. The woman sat on the fence, her skirt gently fluttering in the wind, looking back and locking lips with the man. The world seems to have frozen. If it weren't for the woman holding a few needles in her hand, it would definitely be a romantic and beautiful picture. A long time passed. Zhongli was stunned for a long time, his mind went blank. He probably didn't realize what happened at all. He didn't even notice that Su Buling's hand was secretly placed on his clothes. It wasn't until she hadn't breathed for too long that she was about to faint from suffocation, then Chu Chu suddenly came back to her senses, her eyes changed from confused to stunned. "You." Zhongli Chuchu tilted his head, his shoulders were trembling, and said to the side, "Ba, ba, ba." After a few mouthfuls, he wiped his lips with his hand and glared at Su Buling, but his eyes were watery and full of grievances. Su Buletinling was satisfied and raised his hand to scratch the tip of Chu Chu's tall nose. "Okay, go back to sleep and stop thinking so much." As he spoke, he turned around and walked towards the room, raising his hand and waving. "You." Zhongli Chuchu was breathing rapidly and stared at Su Buling, but couldn't even speak. Until Su Buling's figure disappeared from the door, silence returned to the corridor. "This bastard." Zhongli's face turned red and white, and the sad memories he had just forgotten had long been forgotten, leaving only shame and anger in his heart. She jumped off the fence, ran quickly to the door, raised her hand and knocked hard on the door several times. Dong dong. In the room, Zhongli Juju, who had been secretly observing in the dark, naturally did not dare to show his head at this time, pretending to have just woken up, and asked in a daze. "Chuchu, what's wrong?" Zhongli Chuchu's face turned red and she gritted her teeth and said, "Master, if Su Buletinling takes advantage of me and he kisses me, do you care about him? I am your apprentice, that is, his apprentice. It's really, ba ba ba." "What, he dares to kiss you? Su Buling, what's wrong with you? If you dare to bully my apprentice, I can't beat you to death." Bang bang bang. A crisp sound came from the room. I don't know where it was hit or who hit whom. Anyway, the sound sounded very elastic. Zhongli Chuchu's eyes were stunned. The gratitude he had just expressed to his master was wiped out by this blatant act of aiding the emperor. She gritted her teeth and held back for a long time. She had nothing to say, so she kicked the door hard and ran back to her room. Looking at her like this, I guess she won't be able to sleep tomorrow night. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 742. In late September, as a rain fell on the Xiangjiang River, the weather became increasingly cold. The boat was moored along the Xiangjiang River, and the maids hid in the boathouse to avoid the rain. Zhu Manzi sat alone on the edge of the boat, holding an oil paper umbrella in the misty rain, fishing for big fat fish in autumn. Two dogs lay on the edge of the boat with their front legs, sticking out their tongues and looking forward. The big white goose was thrown directly into the water, showing off its power on the water. On the second floor of the boat, Xiao Qi sat at the desk by the window, watching the news sent by spies from all over the country. The secretary Song Yufu, holding a letter, sat next to her and whispered. Sister Kikai, Nanyu sent a letter saying that we transferred troops to the southwest, which made the people of Nanyu feel uneasy and asked the reason. How should we respond? The letter from Nanyu should be sent to Chang'an, the capital of Daewoo. But the Prince of Daewoo is only 9 years old, and he certainly can't make his own decisions. In the end, it is the King of Su who has the final say. Prince Su was busy with the internal affairs of the court and the external defense of northern Qi, so he had no time to care about the small border country of Nanyu. The decision-making power naturally fell to Su Buling. In order to avoid unnecessary running around, the letter from the court of Nanyu was sent directly to the ship as soon as it entered the pass. Xiao Qi was too lazy to even read the content of the letter, but just said calmly. Just say that we will train troops in the autumn and take a casual stroll in the southern border, so that they don't panic. Song Yufu nodded, took out the rice paper, and began to carefully consider the words and brew a draft. Below the study, in the room on the first floor of the ship, Lu Hongluan sat on the soft couch, holding a half-sewn robe in her hand, with patterns embroidered on it. She lived alone in Chang'an City for many years, but she didn't feel bored at this time. She just looked out the window occasionally to see if her precious child in the south had returned. Yunu sat sideways beside the soft couch, holding a needle and thread in her hand, and her fair cheeks had a little more melancholy than before. Yunu and Lu Hongluan are of the same age and grew up together. They are both master and servant and best friends. In a wealthy family, their relationship is even closer than that of real sisters. Lu Hongluan is very thoughtful and naturally noticed that something was wrong with Yunu. She asked softly. Yunu, what's wrong? Were you bullied by Jiao Yi again? Yunu lowered her eyebrows and looked at the needlework in her hand. She hesitated for a moment before shaking her head gently. Not really. Well, Jiao Yi just said something to me last night, and I think it makes sense. Lu Hongluan put down her robe and looked a little helpless. Just say it directly, why beat around the bush? Yunu blushed a little and was a little embarrassed. She thought for a while. In another half a month, it will be the young lady's birthday again. In the blink of an eye, another year has passed. It feels like time has passed so quickly. Lu Hongluan blinked her eyes and thought carefully, and it seemed to be true. The last time she celebrated her birthday, it was still on the surface of the East China Sea. She was still a virgin. Unconsciously, she was 1 year older, and even her back was given to Ling Er. However, Lu Hongluan was already married, so she didn't care much about this, but just nodded and smiled. Yunu saw that her wife was not open-minded, thought for a while, and said. Jiao Yi is almost crazy about men. She worries about looking in the mirror all day, fearing that she will be old and yellow and can't get married in the future. Madam, what do you think Jiao Yi is anxious about? She is 1 year younger than me. I will be 30 soon, and I am not as anxious as she is. Such direct words, if you don't understand, there will be problems. Lu Hongluan was stunned when she heard the voice. She was always thinking about giving birth to a baby for Su Buling, and she really forgot to take care of the maids around her. Lu Hongluan looked at Yunu for a few times, and then she realized that the playmate who had grown up with her since childhood was already ripe, and it would be wasted if she didn't pick it up. Yunu, do you have someone you like? Yunu hurriedly shook her head. I'm talking about Jiao Yi. I'm just a maid. Matters like marriage are all decided by the madam. I've been with the madam for more than 20 years. I can't live without the madam, and I don't want to marry someone else. Don't want to marry someone else? Then you want to marry someone at home. Lu Hongluan narrowed her eyes slightly and glanced at Yunu twice. I'm Ling Er's aunt. Logically, you're older than Ling Er. Even if I break the etiquette with him, you follow me. Don't you feel uncomfortable? I'm so happy. Yunu lowered her head slightly in embarrassment. What are you talking about, madam? How can I be so embarrassed? But if the young prince wants a maid and madam is not jealous, what can I, as a maid, say? When Lu Hongluan heard this, she was immediately unhappy and raised her hand to pinch Yunu's arm. You are my maid, why should I be jealous? You should have been a maid in the same room, isn't it normal for Ling Er to want you? How could I not even understand this little rule? Yunu pursed her lips. It's good that madam is not jealous. In this case, then, the maid's lifelong affairs are entirely up to madam? Lu Hongluan blinked her eyes and felt something was wrong. But the words had been said, and it was not a big deal, so she could only nod her head. I know, I'll tell Ling Er when he comes back. The river was full of mist and rain, and the autumn colors were bleak. On the terrace behind the ship, the golden petals were still gorgeous, but as autumn deepened, they slowly became a little haggard. The woman in a plain long dress leaned on the recliner without moving, staring at the misty rain outside the terrace. She didn't know how long she had been staring, and she didn't even notice that the small mahogany sign in her hand had fallen to the ground. In the room, Xiao Xiang'er was wrapped in a bright red dress and carefully carving small bells in front of the table. There were nearly 10 sets of colorful bells, which were neatly placed in exquisitely crafted small wooden boxes. They were New Year's gifts for the girls. Although they were just outside the window, Kui Zioan became less and less taciturn, and Xiao Xiang'er was very focused on her work. The room was so quiet that the only sound was the wind outside the window. Ahem. I don't know how long it took, but 2 slight coughs sounded from the terrace. Xiao Xiang'er was stunned for a moment, and then she quickly put down the bell, took the shawl from the side, came to the terrace outside the window, and said with concern. Zioan, it's raining so heavily. What are you doing outside? What should you do if you catch a cold? Thank you, Queen Mother. Kui Zioan raised her hand to take the blanket and wrapped it around herself, with a smile on her lips. I didn't catch a cold, I just thought the rain was beautiful and I didn't want to go in. Xiao Xiang'er looked at it for a few times, then raised his hand to hold Zioan's wrist and checked it. After finding nothing strange, he sat down next to it and thought about it for a while, but didn't know what to say. Before Su Buling left, she asked Xiao Xiang'er to spend more time with Kui Zioan. For this reason, she didn't even play mahjong and lived with Zioan all day long. But no matter how many stories there is no time to finish them, and there is nothing going on the ship. Zioan has no hobbies, not even planting flowers, so what else can she say? Kui Zioan is actually very considerate and can see what people are thinking. Seeing that the Queen Mother was a little worried, she took the lead in starting the conversation. Su Buling has been gone for 20 days. He should be entering South Vietnam now. Xiao Xiang'er smiled. I went in a few days ago. I heard the news came back that I was checking something, and they all went to the capital of Nanyu. Kui Zioan looked at the south, thought for a moment, and asked curiously. Mother, do you think Su will bring back a beautiful girl this time? Xiao Xiang'er must have thought about this and warned Su Buling before leaving. Naturally, she was full of confidence at this time. No, he just went to Jeju's mother's house to do some errands, how could he bring the girl back again? He said that there are only a dozen now, and he won't mess around with women anymore. A dozen? Kui Zioan held her cheek with her hands and asked curiously. Are there as many as a dozen? Xiao Xiang'er sighed, stretched out her slender jade fingers, and counted with her fingers. Me, sister, jealousy, Dabai, Xiaju, Manzi, Yufu, King Yi, Shuchu. At this point, Xiao Xiang'er felt something was wrong, raised his eyes and glanced at Kui Zioan, and said no more. Kui Zioan saw Xiao Xiang'er's thoughts and didn't mind. She smiled and said. Actually, not much. I just go out and run around all the time, which is a bit boring. Xiaowen looked at the two flower pots next to her. It's just like flowers. If you plant them but don't take care of them, over time, the flowers will die. This sentence naturally touched Xiao Xiang'er's heart. Who among the girls on the boat wouldn't want to be in front of Su Buling every day? But men always have to do business. If they don't go out and run around, there will be no chance of staying together peacefully. Kui Xiaowen also understood this truth, and just talked about it with her mother. After saying a few words, he tapped the ground with his toes, causing the lounge chair to sway, and continued to stare at the rain curtain in a daze. Xiao Xiang'er sat in front of him and stayed with him for a long time, but after thinking about it, he couldn't find a suitable topic. He could only shake his head, got up and returned to the room, continuing to play with small objects. The breeze is still blowing on the terrace, blowing the golden flowers, and the flower branches are swaying gently in the wind. I don't know if it was because of the wind or because it was the season of falling flowers. One piece of the gorgeous petals fell silently and landed next to the lounge chair. Kui Xiaowen leaned over and picked up the petals and the mahogany sign. She held them in her hand and looked at them for a long time. She sighed softly and disappeared with the autumn wind in the misty rain all over the river. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 743. The autumn rain continued, and 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. In the small inn in the south of Yangzhou City, Su Buling avoided the limelight for a while. After the patrol in the city gradually relaxed, he set his sights on the second prince's mansion again. It has been raining in Chu for days, and the army's marching speed will inevitably be affected. It will take some time for the army to reach the city of Liuzhu. At present, the whereabouts of Aunt Gui has not been found. As long as the army starts to push forward, Nanyu will inevitably be a mess, and there will be no chance to find someone at that time. Moreover, Nanyu and Dayu are on good terms on the surface. If there is no reason to attack the border, it is easy for the princes of all parties to have the idea of the rabbit dies and the fox mourns, and the animals feel sad for their own kind. If a legitimate reason can be found, it is still necessary to find it. In the inn room, Su Buling spread his arms and let Jeju tie soft armor, arm guards, and leggings on his body. The soft armor was bought at a high price on the black market in the city. It is woven with gold thread and special silk thread, with leather in the middle. The soft armor is not very protective, just slightly better than leather armor, and it is the same as having nothing in front of masters, but it does not affect flexibility, and can prevent most flying knives and poisonous needles, and snakes, scorpions, centipedes, etc. will definitely not bite through. In addition, Jeju also used leather to sew a pair of leather gloves for Su Buling. The workmanship is definitely not as good as Xiao Xiang'er's, but it is very simple and tight, and it can also prevent the bites of poisonous insects and scorpions. Zhongli Jeju tightened the straps of the arm guard, and still teased. The old saying is right, once bitten by a snake, you will be afraid of ropes for 10 years. In the past, you didn't wear armor when I asked you to, but now you have put on your protective gear. Su Buling didn't wear protective gear before because he had to make a trade-off between flexibility and protection, but the South Vietnam Jianghu really didn't follow martial ethics, and there were all kinds of hidden weapons and poisonous insects, which made people hard to defend against. It's better to wear it if you can save some trouble. He didn't feel embarrassed about it, but just patted his silly wife on the butt who teased him. Zhongli Jeju glared and looked back at Chuchu who was wiping the weapons beside him. Seeing that Chuchu didn't notice, he secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Zhongli Chuchu turned her back to the two of them, sorting out the weapons and detoxification pills that Su Buling was going to use, with a bit of annoyance on her face. A few days ago, Su Buling took away her first kiss, and her master still acted like it's none of my business. She was helpless and couldn't beat Su Buling, so she had no way to deal with it. It would have been fine if he had kissed her forcefully. Zhongli Chuchu thought that Su Buling couldn't hold back, or that his master had instigated him to cook her life into a done deal. After returning to her room, she was nervous and annoyed, and was so scared that she couldn't sleep all night. As a result, the next day, Su Buling returned to his usual cold and extraordinary appearance, as if the kissing her had never happened. Zhongli Chuchu also wanted to pretend that it had never happened, just like the time when her buttocks were touched, but Su Buling was obviously boiling a frog in warm water, and he kept pushing it. Isn't this obviously bullying? After packing up, Zhongli Chuchu turned around and handed it to Su Buling, without looking at the two people, but just looking away. Su Buling put on the black robe, took the straight knife and tied it diagonally on his back, hung various anti-poison things on his waist, and then patted Chuchu on the buttocks. You wait in the inn, pay attention to the surrounding movements, don't let anyone rob your home. I will be back in half an hour at most. Zhongli Chuchu was blatantly taken advantage of, and the master was still watching in front of him, so he couldn't hold his face, and turned back angrily. Have you touched enough? What do you mean? Su Buling raised his hand and pointed to the leather gloves on his hand. Wear gloves, don't think about it. Zhongli Chuchu opened his mouth, his eyes stunned. Is there any difference? Is it not considered touching if you are wearing clothes? Zhongli Juju smiled secretly in her heart, and she had to pretend to protect her apprentice. She raised her hand and hit Su Buling. Go and do your work. You still don't forget to bully Chuchu at this time. Su Buling nodded slightly, and his figure flashed, and he disappeared in the rain outside the window. Zhongli Chuchu gritted her teeth, and when she saw Su Buling running away, she looked at Zhongli Juju next to her. Master, what do you mean? He is so aggressive and insulting my innocence, but you don't care. Are you waiting for him to force me before you remember that I am your apprentice? Zhongli Juju hoped that Su Buling would use force to settle the matter quickly, but Su Buling just didn't agree. With a smile, she pulled Chuchu to sit down beside the bed and said earnestly. Men are like this, don't take it to heart. Zhongli Chuchu was slightly annoyed. He is your man, not mine. You are my only master, and if you don't take care of him, who can I go to for justice? Can I let him take advantage of me? Su Buling had already left, and only the master and apprentice were left in the room, as well as a bird and an insect on guard. Zhongli Juju saw that there were no outsiders, so he sat in front of Chuchu and advised softly. Chuchu, it's not a good idea to drag it on like this. I'm already married to Su Buling, and you like Su Buling, so why don't we marry Su Buling together? It's true that Zhongli Juju has many tricks to trick people, but when it comes to this kind of trickery, it's obviously not as good as the black-hearted Dabai who has a twisted mind. Saying this will definitely have the opposite effect. Zhongli Chuchu was immediately annoyed, raised her hand and twisted Zhongli Juju's waist. Master! What's wrong with you? Have you been fooled by Su Buling's magic potion? How can you say such a thing? Zhongli Juju blushed and smiled awkwardly. I just saw that Ning Qingyi and that stinky Taoist nun were pretty, so I just chatted with you casually. They are them. I regard you as my mother. Zhongli Chuchu looked at the master with a strange look. I like Su Buling, but I have cut off my relationship with him and gave him to you. You colluded with him and dragged me to the pirate ship. Is it fun? When the time comes, we will lie together as master and disciple and be bullied by him. What do I care about your name? Just call me sister. Zhongli Chuchu's eyes were stunned. Don't you like it? Call me sister, it's okay, but you can't let Ning Yuhi know. Zhongli Chuchu clenched her hands tightly and held it in for a long time. Master, do you believe that I will change my name to your mother? As long as you like, you can call me anything. Zhongli Chuchu's head was numb, and she hugged her arms and turned away, not talking. The streets were full of rain. Dark clouds were pressing down over Yangzhou City, and the sky had darkened. The visibility in the rain was only a few steps, and under the cover of the rain, even the footsteps were difficult to hear. Su Buling took advantage of the perfect weather, and climbed up and down the building, and came to Gaifei Street again, near Chenju's mansion. It was raining heavily, and the prosperous Gaifei Street was still brightly lit, but there were no pedestrians. A layer of rainwater accumulated on the bluestone floor tiles, and as the jade beads fell, it hit the water splashes made of millions of raindrops. At the closing time of the old tavern Nian Ningxian opposite the mansion, the old shopkeeper had left, and the waiter who stayed in the shop wiped the table in the tavern and turned the stool upside down on the table. Su Buling stopped on the eaves, with a black veil covering his cheeks, revealing only a pair of eyes, with hawk-like eyes, sweeping around the mansion, and not forgetting to glance at the old tavern. After confirming all the sentries and guards around, Su Buling flew over the wall silently like a swallow in the rain, and went to Chenju's back house from the top of the house. In this world, the buildings of wealthy families all pay attention to feng shui and layout. They cannot be renovated randomly, and the owner cannot live in the side room. Even if the house is very large, it is not difficult to find Chenju. Su Buling came to the backyard garden, but did not go in directly. South Vietnamese poison masters like Jeju are best at tracking and anti-tracking. They often use the secretions of various animals to set traps. As long as they touch, they will leave a smell, and then the pets will track the traces. The advantage of this method is that it is difficult to see with the naked eye, and the human nose cannot smell where there is a smell. The disadvantage is that it will disappear after being flushed by water, and it is difficult to keep for a long time. Su Buling came here in the heavy rain to prevent being tracked. After a moment of exploration on the roof, Su Buling did not enter the corridor, but moved directly from the roof to the roof of the study. There is a secret sentry in the study. A guard wearing a straw raincoat is lying behind the roof and scanning the courtyard. Su Buling stopped behind the sentry, knocked him unconscious, and lay down beside him, listening to the noise below. "Brother Wang, you have been looking for him for 3 days, but there is no news at all. How about you let me catch him? I promise to bring him back to you within 3 days. Ining, you have been talking all day, go back to the palace quickly, don't make trouble." "I am not making trouble, I really have a way to find that person, he is in the city, there are some clues, but I haven't found the exact location yet. Thousands of guards and constables have searched for 3 days but still can't find him." "You have been in the palace all the time, how did you find him?" I have a way anyway, Brother Wang asked me to lead the soldiers to catch the traitor, I will tell you." "Princess, just listen to my advice, His Highness has to go to the palace to preside over government affairs tomorrow morning, it's so late. There are 3 people in the study, in addition to Chenju, there is also a strange woman and an old lady." Su Buling felt something was wrong when he heard this conversation. If his whereabouts were discovered, it would be a much more serious problem than investigating Chenju. He then used his fingers to move the tile slightly and looked down. In the lighted room, Chenju sat behind the desk and rubbed his forehead, obviously annoyed. In front of the desk stood a young woman in a blue and white dress, with a familiar silver moon scimitar hanging around her waist, and long black hair draped over her back. Due to the angle, only the tip of her tall nose could be seen. The woman's dress was not much different from what she saw outside the carriage, but the size of her clothes seemed to be 2 circles smaller than last time. It should be that she was injured by a palm and had not healed yet. She was wrapped in a chest wrap and medicine. At this time, the woman was pacing back and forth, annoyed Chenju with a torrent of words. The old nanny in palace clothes stood beside her, persuading her helplessly. Su Buling was not surprised to see this woman. She must have been very close to Chenju last time she was able to sit in Chenju's carriage. When he heard the word brother, he naturally knew that it was the princess or princess of the Chen family. However, there were too many princesses and princesses in small countries, and Su Buling could not know them all. Can find my whereabouts. Su Buling narrowed his eyes and thought for a while. If he could find him, it could only be the snake that bit him last time. However, the capital is so big that a small snake can't run all the way no matter how fast it runs. It must not be found yet. Thinking of this, Su Buling took out 3 copper coins from his sleeves, ready to knock out the 3 people without alerting the guards, and then go in to interrogate them. But before Su Buling took action, several noises came from a distance. Who? There is an assassin. Su Buling was startled and thought he was discovered. He lowered his body a little and held the handle behind his shoulder. But when he looked up, he saw that the guards around him were not looking at him. Instead, they were looking at the rooftop of a building in the east house. Many masters in the dark jumped out and ran towards that direction. Above the high building under the rain curtain, a straw raincoat swordsman stood on the roof with a sword in hand, swaggering, with the 3-foot green blade pointing diagonally at the roof ridge, without any movement to hide his tracks. Even in the hazy rain curtain, it was clear that he was discovered at this time, and he neither killed him nor fled quickly. Are you sick? Su Buling was immediately annoyed, and after cursing inwardly, where did this 3-legged assassin come from, he lowered his head and looked into the house. The 3 people in the room had heard the movement. Chen Xining was the first to react. Without any hesitation, he took out a handful of smoke pills and threw them into the room. The smoke instantly obscured all vision, and then there were a few squeaks, as if there was a secret door in the study room opened. In wealthy families, it is normal to hide secret rooms in the study and bedroom to avoid criminals. Even in the homes of merchants, most of them hide secret rooms to avoid bandits. The surrounding guards were already alert. A few rushed towards the assassin, and most ran to the study room. If Su Buling ran in at this time, even if he could catch Chenju, he would have no time to ask him questions. If he kidnapped him, it would cause a lot of trouble. Su Buling thought about it and suddenly understood the intention of the straw raincoat swordsman. This was because he couldn't find his location, so he used this method to remind Chenju and others and the guards in the mansion. Thinking of this, Su Buling's eyes sank slightly, and he looked up. The straw raincoat swordsman on the roof, after alarming all the guards, turned around and flew out of the mansion, and the masters among the guards chased him from behind. It can't be assumed that nothing happened if Su Buling sneaked into the mansion and came to do bad things. After Su Buling glanced at it, he flew up silently, detoured from the side, and chased the straw raincoat swordsman. Thanks to the leader of reading for the Rise of China King. Thank you for the 20,000 reward from the moon is cold and the oil lamp is exhausted. Many thanks to Oilra for the 10,000 star reward. 3 chapters, 10,000 words. The Queen Mother baby has a first-class star. If you guys want to give me a reward, please give it to Aunt Lu. Maybe I can get another star before I finish the book. Thank you. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 744. The wind and rain swept through thousands of streets, and there were many ghosts on the buildings. Electric light suddenly appeared above the black clouds over the city, and the swordsman wearing a raincoat and a bamboo hat suddenly appeared on the top of the house, and in an instant he disappeared into the rain curtain without making any sound. The next moment, dozens of figures armed with swords passed over the house one after another, and the tiles shattered and the beams made a crisp sound. When the people in the house ran out to check, there was only a thunderstorm in the city outside. This man is so powerful. Yeah, I can't catch up. On top of the buildings that were quickly forming, Zhou Qin's grandson Shang Guanjinghong, with dozens of his masters, followed the footsteps of the shadow in front of him with all his strength. Shang Guanjinghong's martial arts skills are not bad, and he is also a first-rate master in the world, just a step behind the masters. However, even though he is running with all his strength, it is still difficult to keep up with the people in front of him. This also convinced him that the swordsman in the bamboo hat in front of him was the Su Buling he had been searching for all these days. After all, apart from Su Buling, his grandfather was the only one in the entire capital with such exaggerated movement skills, and even Sikongji, who was the South Vietnam 7 stars, might not be able to be this fast. Seeing his opponent running further and further away, Shang Guanjinghong felt anxious, but he had no choice. However, when the swordsman in the bamboo hat in front was about to reach the city wall, he suddenly stopped under the city wall. Stop! Shang Guanjinghong didn't believe that a master-level master with such good movement skills could not even climb a 3-foot-high city wall. He hurriedly raised his hand to stop, and the dozens of masters behind him also quickly stopped and spread out to flank him. The swordsman in a bamboo hat stood on the roof beside the city wall. The blade of his sword kept sliding down due to the rain, as if he had not seen the pursuers behind him. Shang Guanjinghong knew that he was weighing a lot, so he stood on the spot with Miao Dao in both hands. Seeing that the other party refused to run away, he didn't know what to do. If the other party really promised not to do so, they probably wouldn't be enough to kill them if they numbered dozens of people. There was only a short stalemate. The swordsman in the bamboo hat did not jump up the city wall. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, revealing the profile of his face covered by a black scarf, and said hoarsely, "Go away, I don't want to kill anyone." When the voice is calm, it is like a hunter holding a sharp knife, chasing away a group of lambs that have come to the door to die. Shang Guanjinghong frowned. In fact, he didn't want to take risks, but Su Buling was right in front of him, and he was still standing so arrogantly. If he rolled away with his tail between his legs without saying a word, he, Baikagu, had gone to such great lengths to deceive Su Buling. "What are you here for?" Seeing that his grandfather Zhou Qin and the second elder Sikongji hadn't come over yet, Shang Guanjinghong was a little anxious. In order to delay time, he said, "You are alone and you are worthy of letting us go." Rustle. The sad sword cry sounded in the wind and rain. A cold light flashed under the thunder clouds, and the figure of the swordsman in a bamboo hat disappeared from the top of the house, like a black falcon flying above the city. In just a few breaths, he passed the dozens of chasing masters, and even the sound of his robes was heard. Without bringing him up, he came to Shang Guanjinghong. Shang Guanjinghong's pupils suddenly dilated, he didn't even have time to make an expression, and he hurriedly raised his hands to block. Bite! A few sparks burst out in the rainy night, but without causing much disturbance. The Miao Dao in Shang Guanjinghong's hand flew out and stuck on the street below the house. The guards who were chasing around saw only an afterimage flying from the side, and they broke out in cold sweat behind them. They turned around to rush for help, but when they saw the scene in front of them, they stopped hurriedly. The swordsman in bamboo hat who was still standing under the city wall just now came to stand in front of Shang Guanjinghong. The 3-foot green blade touched Shang Guanjinghong's throat half an inch, and the raindrops hit the blade and made little splashes of water. Shang Guanjinghong only took 3 steps back. His hands were empty and he stood frozen on the spot with a pale face. Being so close to each other, Shang Guanjinghong was able to see clearly that the iron sword in the hand of the swordsman in a bamboo hat was already rusty. At the end of the slender blade, a small character D could be vaguely seen. The hunter is called D. 20 years ago, Pu D, the only South Vietnamese swordsman recognized by the 3 major swordsmanship families in the Central Plains, was also the strongest ranger in South Vietnam. His nickname was Hunter. Being recognized by a swordsmanship family is just a nice way of saying it in the world. To put it simply, you just go to the door and hand over the battle invitation, beat the opponent to the ground, and you will naturally be recognized. Being recognized by the three major swordsmanship families meant that Pud had defeated the young Liu Beiming, the late Zhu eldest son, and Song Ying of the Junqian Cao family in single combat. At that time, the Tang family was still a second-rate family, and Tang Jiao was not worthy of being a rival. Also 20 years ago, when Pud was at the height of his fame, he suddenly disappeared. Just like his sword, after leaving a brightest sword light in the night, it disappeared completely, making it difficult for the world to trace the trace. 20 years is a generation, and not many people still remember the swordsman. However, Shang Guanjinghong still remembered. Seeing the long sword in front of him, Shang Guanjinghong was stunned for a moment, staring at the swordsman in the bamboo hat with some disbelief. The swordsman in the bamboo hat removed his sword blade and pointed it diagonally at the street. His lips under the black scarf moved. "Can you leave now?" Shang Guanjinghong took 2 steps back, thought for a moment, raised his hand to salute, turned around and waved, and led the people back to Gaifei Street. Thunderbolt. Lightning flashed across the night sky, and the city was still windy and rainy. The swordsman in a bamboo hat stood on the house, watching the dozens of pursuers go away. He did not leave, but held a long sword, standing between the sky and the earth like a giant tree. Bang bang. A slight clap sounded from behind. Su Buling, carrying a straight knife on his back, appeared at some unknown time, sitting lazily on the wall, his face covered with a black scarf, his eyes filled with approval, and his clear voice rang out in the wind and rain. "What a fast sword! The last time I saw such a fast sword was by Zulu. A good swordsman doesn't fight, but runs to a tavern to be a waiter. Are all sword learners so willful?" Pud turned around, raised his bamboo hat, and looked at Su Buling above. "I don't want to kill anyone. From now on, leave Yangzhou City, and I won't make things difficult for you. You can't leave until the matter is done. You only have one chance. Since you alarmed the guards to remind Chenju, it means you are not Chenju's man. What is your relationship with Chenju?" After these 2 sentences, the walls fell silent, leaving only the 2 people separated by the rain curtain. Pud didn't know Su Buling, but it didn't matter who dared to attack Chenju's carriage and sneak into the mansion to plot. Swish. The sword sounded like crying. Pud turned the sword lightly, and the roof under his feet suddenly exploded. The whole person broke through the rain curtain, but in the blink of an eye, he had arrived under the wall. Su Buling tapped the wall tiles, his body was as light as a wild goose, and he drew his sword from his back in mid-air. His momentum suddenly changed again, and he pressed towards Pud, who was in front of Qing Feng, with the momentum of splitting the mountain. He raised his hand and used the Thousand Blade Sect's signature skill, the 28 chain knives. Ding ding ding. 2 figures collided in the rain, 3 sparks flashed, and Pud's figure had already fallen, stepping on the floor tiles under the city wall. Su Buling turned like the wind, and the sword in his hand rolled up the wind and rain like a wave, pressing towards Pud with the momentum of overwhelming mountains and seas, leaving no gap. 28 chain knives. Pud's sword tip danced quickly, and there was a bit of surprise in his eyes, but his hand seemed to move quickly, as if it was not the first time he had faced this move. The strength of the 28 chain knives is that they are linked together and cannot be avoided. Either you are faster than the opponent's move and you can solve it yourself, or you can forcibly break away at the cost of your life. After Pud connected 3 swords, he did not hesitate at all. He did not block the 4th sword, but forced his body to turn aside, and the sword went straight to Su Buling's throat. Snap! The sword flashed, and blood mixed into the rain curtain. Su Buling turned his head to avoid the sword blade, and the sword in his hand chopped on Pud's right chest, directly sweeping a bloody wound deep enough to see the bone. However, Pud dodged in time and received the sword with his torso. Although he was seriously injured, his combat power was not affected in a short time. After forcing Su Buling to stop with one sword, the sword in Pud's hand suddenly accelerated, sweeping all parts of Su Buling's body like a raging flame. It has the ghostliness of the Lu family swords, one sword, 100 sounds, and the swiftness and accuracy of the Cao and Zhu families. It can be said that it integrates the strengths of the three families into a school of its own. The only shortcoming is that it does not have the purity of the three major sword schools, but it is definitely worthy of the word Grandmaster. Su Buling moved backwards step by step, and after connecting 12 swords, his back hit the city wall. At this moment, Pud's eyes suddenly condensed, and the long sword in his hand suddenly stabbed at Su Buling's throat like a venomous snake. As soon as the sword was used, Pud felt a chill in his heart, thinking that it was not good. Su Buling had been using knife moves just now. Once the 28-way chain knife was broken, it was difficult to reconnect, and he was basically suppressed. But just when he was forced to the wall and could no longer retreat, Su Buling turned the straight knife in his hand lightly, used the knife as a sword, and raised his hand to stab with the sword. This sword was the Shaking Mountain learned from Manzi. It was created by the contemporary sword saint. He learned all the martial arts in the world, removed the dross and kept the essence into sword moves, and then integrated hundreds of sword moves and refined them into one sword. In Zhu Liu's hands, this sword can kill Song Ying instantly. Eunuch Jia sensed Zhu Liu's killing intention and was able to save Song Yu in advance. Su Buling had lost all his emotions when fighting against others, and was simply attacking and defending with all his heart and soul. Who in the world could stop him with this sword? In the night rain, a dragon roared suddenly. Su Buling thrust out his sword, which directly shattered his sleeves and arm guards. The straight blade could not withstand the distance, and the trembling was visible to the naked eye. Pud was as shocked as Song Ying was back then, and even more shocked and incomprehensible. He wanted to retract his sword and defend himself, but he had no spare energy at all. He could only watch Su Buling's sword attack him. His movements were smooth and indestructible, and he didn't even have a chance to dodge. Snap! After the sharp sword roar, rain splashed, the bamboo hat was torn into pieces, and the fragments pierced into the houses and the bricks and stones of the city wall. Pud's long hair, which was bound by hemp rope, was shattered, and the grey hair flew into the rain curtain, and then fell to the ground by the heavy rain in an instant, and the messy long hair was scattered on his face. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 745. Su Buling held the sword in one hand, clamped the tip of the sword between the fingers of his left hand, and looked at the swordsman in front of him. He learned the sword Shake the Mountain because old Sidhu said that there are people in the world who can break the chain sword. This sword was originally prepared as a trump card for Eunuch Jia, Li Hanzheng, and Zhou Qingqiu to kill Pud. In fact, there was no need to use this move. But all swordsmen, especially outstanding swordsmen, pay attention to being clean and neat. When you meet a worthy opponent, if you don't demonstrate your knowledge to the fullest, you will neither respect your opponent nor your own martial arts. After all, there were too few opponents who could make Su Buling go all out. Dayo is almost dead. Whether there will be more in the future is still unknown. Kill one and lose one. Su Buling took back the long knife from Pud's head and held it upside down in his hand, his eyes flat. My skills are good, but it has been neglected for too long. It is a pity. Pud's chest was bleeding, but he didn't seem to feel anything. He put the sword back into its scabbard and looked at Su Buling's sword. Good swordsmanship, is this a mountain-shaking thing? Su Buling nodded. Are you Pud? Nanyu can use swords so well. It seems that the Nanyu swordsman was the best swordsman 20 years ago. I heard about it from Mr. Storyteller, and I thought you would have died long ago. After all, he was a genius of the younger generation. How did he become like this? Pud held up the sword and looked at the stab wound on his chest. He was definitely dead. He was silent for a moment and sighed softly. Drink. Su Buling put the drunken bamboo sword back into the scabbard behind his back and turned towards Gaifei Street. Pud took off the face towel, wiped the rain off his face, and tied up his scattered grey hair. Gaifei Street was not far from the city wall. The two of them walked silently through the alley until they came to the back door of the old tavern. Pud untied his raincoat and hung it on the wall, opened the back door, and two people entered, leaving a trail of blood behind them. The candles were lit, and the old tavern, which had not changed in 20 years, became a little brighter. The door was closed, and the noise from the mansion opposite could still be vaguely heard. Su Buling sat down at the wine table, untied his face towel, and wiped the rain off his face. Pud returned to the same appearance as the waiter he had been for 20 years. He no longer had any momentum. After warming a pot of wine on the stove, he took it to the opposite side of the wine table and sat down. He poured a bowl for himself and another for Su Buling. I picked up a bowl and drank it all in one gulp. Su Buling said nothing. After taking a sip of wine, he looked at Pud calmly. After a bowl of wine, Pud's face gained a little more color. He looked at the candlelight for a long time and then said softly. More than 20 years ago, I was working in the Jianghu in Nanyu and became famous. Once I passed by Lingshan County and met a little girl. She was a beautiful girl from the magistrate's family in Lingshan County. Su Buling naturally understood who the girl was, picked up the wine bowl and took a sip. Then what? Pud shook his head. We fell in love at first sight, and we often met secretly in Lingshan. We stayed with her from the time she was 15 until she was 17. We made a lifelong commitment to each other, and agreed that in the autumn of the year she turned 17, we would go out and wander around the world together. The result was that day, she broke the appointment. I waited on Lingshan for a long time, couldn't bear it, and ran to her house to find him. It turned out that she was already getting married, so she only gave me a letter. Pud picked up the wine bowl and drank it all in one gulp, his eyes a little red. Su Buling listened quietly and said softly, "What does the letter say?" The letter only said that I wanted to enter the palace, and that we would no longer have contact with each other. I wished that I would be successful in the world. I was young and arrogant at the time, so I didn't go to see her and ran away to the Central Plains. I actually regretted it after I left, but I couldn't bear to go back, so I focused on practicing my sword without thinking about it. I have traveled 10,000 miles and practiced a million swords. He practiced walking, eating, and even dreaming. He even risked his life for the sword. It took him 3 years to learn the sword of Zulu and Cao Sanjia, and he was in the limelight for a while. After waiting for success and fame, I found that I still couldn't forget her. I felt that what happened back then was too hasty and I had to listen to her face to face, so I returned to South Vietnam. Su Buling sighed. What then? Pud's eyes were full of sadness. Then, I came to the capital and found out that she often came to this tavern. I just waited here. That day, she was sitting at this table. I showed my face at the window, she came to the alley behind alone. When we meet again, things have changed. I asked her about the letter, and she said that her father forced her to get married and locked her up. Her father is from Baichong Valley, and I was afraid that her father would embarrass me, so I could only write this letter to deceive her father. She is not such a heartless person. She thought that I could understand her situation and would secretly run to find her. I didn't expect that I would just leave and never come back. At that time, I spoke to her very calmly and seemed to look away. I actually felt very guilty. I had no face to face her, didn't say anything, and walked away alone. But I didn't expect that after she returned to the palace, she would soon die in depression. A few days before her death, she would come to the tavern every day to wait. Later I realized that she had been in the palace all these years, waiting for me to take her away, and I had done nothing when I came back. She had no hope, so naturally she couldn't survive. Pud's voice became smaller and smaller, and he was already bursting into tears before he knew it. Su Buling was silent for a moment, then picked up the wine bowl and took a sip. Then it's your fault. I really can't say anything about other girls. Pud fell silent and did not answer. He turned his head and looked at the closed window. Opposite the window was Chenju's mansion. Now, she only has one son alive in the world, and the only person related to her is this son. I can die, but her son can't. What on earth are you going to do? Su Buling thought for a moment. Someone wants to attack me. If we want to find out, we need to find a few people. He was caught by the 100 Insects Valley. Pud shook his head. Chenju is a cautious person. It is difficult for him to manage things alone. No matter whether it is a big or small matter in the court or the country, it is arranged by Nquagong Jochin behind the scenes. He can't refuse it whether he agrees or not. He knows the existence of the 100 Insects Valley, but never asks about it. Even if you attack him, you can't get anything out of him. Su Buling put down the wine bowl. If that's the case, I'll spare his life. Pu poured another bowl of wine, drank it all, looked at the candlelight on the table, and said nothing. Su Buling looked at the window, a little absent-minded, and didn't know what he was thinking. Tick-tock. Tick-tock. The knife wound on Pud's chest was so deep that the bone was visible. It was difficult to heal. He kept bleeding. The blood flowed from his clothes to the stool, then slid to the ground, and seeped into the gaps in the floor. No matter how high your martial arts skills are, your blood will always run dry. After an unknown amount of time, a soft dong sound was heard in the quiet old tavern. Pud seemed to be drunk and fell on the table, holding 2 strands of hair tied with a red rope in his hand. Su Buling sighed softly, stood up, raised his hand and touched Pud's neck. After confirming that he was dead, he turned and walked out of the old tavern. The wind and rain were still outside the door, and the wine banners and street lanterns were swaying under the eaves. The old tavern seemed to have not changed at all, but after one person was missing, it was no longer the old tavern before. Su Buling came to the front street, looked at the sign of Nian Ningxian, hesitated for a long time, shook his head, and turned to walk towards the Imperial City. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 746. It was a deep autumn night in the palace, with heavy rain. The heavily guarded carriage stopped outside the palace wall, and the palace gate was closed. However, Chenju often entered the palace at night, and the rule that the gate could not be opened at night had long been broken. The third princess Chen Si-ning and Nanny Song were slightly relieved after returning to the palace. It's really bold to run to the prince's house. Those guards get salaries all day long, but they are useless at the critical moment. If it weren't for me today, the prince might have had some trouble. Just after returning from Concubine Street, Chen Si-ning's face was still a little angry. Just chatting in the study, he was unexpectedly attacked by the elusive assassin. This is the capital, and Chenju's regent is no different from the monarch, which is equivalent to the emperor being assassinated in the imperial study. Let alone other things, just spreading this matter can make Nanyu lose its national prestige. The rain was so heavy that Chen Si-ning's blue and white dress got a little wet. The little white snake, who was lying uncomfortably, crawled out of her sleeves and huddled on Chen Si-ning's shoulders, spitting out pink snake letters to comfort her master. Nanny Song held an oil paper umbrella and walked behind Chen Si-ning, shaking her head and sighing. Princess, I advise you not to leave the palace. Dozens of guards chased after him, but they didn't even catch his shadow. Even if you find the whereabouts of the thief, What can you do? Chen Xining knew that she couldn't beat the thief, so she shook her head and said. The martial arts masters in the world have a limit. No matter how high their martial arts are, 1 against 1,000 is already the limit. Even Su Buling, Jia Gonggong, Li Hansheng, and the like in the Central Plains can only resist 1,000 or 2 or 3 at most, and may die of exhaustion before they finish killing. As long as my brother leaves the matter to me and gives me 2,000 crossbowmen, I am 100% sure that I can catch the traitor. Nanny Song knew that she couldn't persuade him. Anyway, the second prince would not agree, so she, as a servant, didn't persuade him, but just listened quietly to Chen Xining's chattering. In Fuan Palace, the palace maids were busy, waiting for Chen Xining to bathe and change clothes in the bathing pool. After Chen Xining washed up in the bathing pool, she came to the bedroom. The bruises on her chest had not yet faded, and Chen Xining drove all the palace maids out, leaving only Nanny Song by her side. Then she took off her nightgown, wearing only tight white thin pants, and lay on the pillow. Looking down at the 5 fingerprints on the white ball on the right, Chen Xining's anger, which had just been suppressed, came up again. A man with such high martial arts skills, sneak attacked a woman like me, and hit so hard, shameless. When I have the chance, I will definitely hit him back and let him taste this. Nanny Song gently wiped the medicinal wine with cotton, looked at the princess's jade-like skin, and shook her head. Practicing martial arts is not something that girls should get involved in. He sneak attacked the princess, and the princess suffered. If the princess slapped him, it would still be the princess who suffered. Chen Xining understood what Nanny Song meant, and said seriously. When martial artists fight, physical contact is not allowed. Contact is inevitable. Although he patted my chest, the Wudang Bagua palm, according to the situation at that time, should have hit here. It was not intentional. In fact, that man's martial arts is a bit scary. If he wanted to kill me, he would have hit me with more force, and I would have died at that time. He deliberately held back, and it should not be for assassination. Song Mama was not aware of this. After applying the milk-flavored dumplings to the smell of medicinal wine, she put away the medicinal wine and picked up the tray. Princess, go to bed early. Yes. After Song Mama left, the huge bedroom became quiet, with only the sound of rain outside the window. Chen Xining stretched out her white arms from the thin blanket, folded them on her belly, revealing her collarbone and a half of snow. Everything has been going wrong recently, and I feel a little irritable and can't sleep at all. Although Chen Xining is talkative, when she is alone, she will not talk to herself if she is not mentally ill. She just reviews the last fight with that person in her mind, looking for loopholes and cracking methods. Unfortunately, after thinking about it for so many days, the result is the same. Her reaction at that time and her strategy against the enemy were flawless. And the man obviously held back many times. The knife was not unsheathed, the palm was not full of strength, and even when he chased her from behind, he just simply grabbed her. In this case, he couldn't beat her, which only means that the opponent's hard power is too much beyond her. If they meet 100 times, the result will be the same. Chen Xining's martial arts are definitely not low, and she must be at the level of a half-step master, but as a princess, she has to take into account the majesty of the royal family and can't be famous in the world. Suddenly encountering an unattainable opponent, in fact, there is more frustration and competitiveness in my heart. The night rain outside the window is faint, and she just lay there quietly for a while. When Chen Xining was thinking seriously about countermeasures, there was a rustling sound by the window, and the little white snake coiled beside the pillow raised its little head and looked over there. Chen Xining's eyes were slightly happy, and she sat up and looked at the window. "Aching, have you found someone?" Under the window, a small door 2 fingers wide opened, and a small green snake no longer than 2 feet long crawled in from the outside of the window, all wet. After entering the room, The small green snake did not respond to the master's call, but spit out the snake tongue, moved in the room, and slowly ran to the wall full of protective gear. The armor and shields hung on the shelves in rows, occupying half of the wall. The small green snake crawled from the side to the back of the wooden shelf, and then there was no movement. Chen Xining frowned slightly, a little puzzled. The vigilance she had developed over the years made her not even think about investigating, and she directly raised her hand to move the pillow. But just as Chen Xining made a move, a soft voice came from behind the wooden shelf, "I advise you not to move, otherwise the snake will die." Chen Xining made a move. He first glanced at the iron cage above and the scimitar next to the pillow. After making sure that the other party could not kill her before she fell into the secret passage, she raised her hand and pulled up the thin blanket slightly to cover the two balls. Said coldly, "Are you the assassin from last time?" Behind the wooden frame, Su Buling stood behind a set of armor, holding the 7 inches of the little green snake with his leather-gloved right hand, while the little green snake opened its bloody mouth and bit his finger. This was natural. It's not bitten through. If you can find his hiding place, it's obviously the snake from last time. In order to avoid leaking his whereabouts, Su Buling had to get rid of the little snake that bit him. Moreover, to trace the whereabouts of Aunt Gui, the princess who was arguing with Chen Ju in the study, might also be useful. After leaving the old tavern, she followed Chen Xining's chariot and entered the imperial city. Su Buling can even enter the imperial city of Chang'an City, so the imperial city of this small border country is naturally not a problem. After arriving at Fuyan Palace, I took advantage of Chen Xining's bathing time to search in the dormitory. I couldn't find a cage for animals, so I could only wait here. After Chen Xining came back, she began to take off her clothes and apply medicinal wine. It's not like Su Buling has never seen women before. Taking advantage is always fair and above board. He has no intention of bullying women who don't care. He waits here quietly, hoping to wait for Chen Xining to fall asleep before going over to stop her. I just didn't expect that the little green snake would find it back on its own. Su Buling squeezed the little green snake and saw that Chen Xining did not move. He walked out from behind the wooden frame and sat down at the round table in the dormitory without looking at the bed. I accidentally hurt the girl last time. I had to do it out of necessity. Please don't blame me. Chen Xining is still a princess who has not left the palace. This may be the first time a man has entered this room since she was born. There was anger in her heart, but her expression showed the calmness she should have. She put her hand on the pillow and said calmly, "You are so brave. You attacked the royal family's car and you dared to run into the palace. What can you do to me?" Chen Xining choked on her words, stared at the little green snake in Su Buling's hand, suppressed these useless words, and said coldly, "What do you want? If you want money, take it yourself. Give me back the snake. I'll pretend I've never seen you." After Su Buling sorted out his words, he shook his head and sighed. "I don't care about money, so I went to trouble the second prince. It was really a helpless move. The princess should also see that I have no intention of killing. With my martial arts, if I want to kill you, you will not be able to leave that day, and it is the same now." Chen Xining understood that this was the truth, and she hesitated. "Do you have a grievance?" Su Buling nodded, "Yes, who would take the risk if they were not desperate? I am originally from the 18th village of Fishuling in Liuzhu. A few days ago, the government wanted to recruit young men. There were too many people in the village, and there were not enough people in the village. They were killed by the government to scare the monkeys, and 5 elders including the village leader were taken away. After searching in various ways, they still found no whereabouts, so I came to the capital." Chen Xining frowned, "Then you should file a complaint and come here to beat me. What are you doing to offend Brother Wang? There are several common people in remote places, and Brother Wang may not even know about this." Su Buling played with the small green snake as smooth as jade and sighed. If I can redeem the person by asking the officials to spend some money, why should I go to all the trouble? Even if I rob the prison, it will be easy with my martial arts. But now, the 5 elders in the village have disappeared from the world, and they don't even know they were taken away. Where? This may be a trivial matter to the princess and even the second prince, but the village pays the annual tax on time and has never committed any crime. The government has arrested people without explanation. How can the village take it as a trivial matter? Look. Chen Xining was just a princess and had no chance to contact the imperial court. Naturally, she didn't know much about the trivial matters in such a remote place, but she also knew that the South Vietnamese imperial court had many rare twists and turns. She was dubious and thought for a moment. I always act impartially. If what you say is true, I will help you investigate this matter. Su Buling nodded and said, someone in the court is arresting me. Princess, it's best not to reveal what I said today, including your brother. I'll take the snake away first. I'll give you 3 days. If the snake is found out, I will return it to you. If not, I can only apologize. When Chen Xining heard this, she felt anxious. You give Ah Ching back to me, and you will raise it to death. If what you say is true, even if you have offended me, I will act impartially and help you redress your grievances. I will guarantee it with my life. If you break your promise, you can come and take my life directly, that's it. If you can't survive, princess, don't worry, take your leave. Su Buling stood up and walked to the window. Chen Xining stood up anxiously, looked down again, and covered her neck with a thin quilt. Wait a minute, you haven't mentioned your relationship with the remnants of 100 Insect Valley. The last time you fought in the prison, you killed more than 100 people. I didn't kill a single officer or jailer, I killed all the killers who were against me. Sikongji and Angwo Gongjiu are in the same group. The entire court is under the control of Baikong Valley. The princess should not know about it, so it's best be careful and don't ask around. Chen Xining was shocked. She obviously didn't believe this nonsense. She opened her mouth to ask more questions, but Su Buling had already disappeared from the window. The little white snake next to the pillow was obviously a little worried about Ah Cheng. It slid to the ground and wanted to chase him. Chen Xining bent down and picked up the little white snake. After making sure that Su Ling would not go far away, she stood up with the scimitar in hand, sat on the bed and frowned in thought. Zhou Qin, 100 Insect Valley. Chen Xining didn't believe Su Buling's words at all, but the mysterious death of her mother and the emperor's brother, the relationship between Zhou Qin and Chenju's current status, and even the madness of her father could easily make people have a very bold idea. Lenovo. But this matter was too big. Chen Xining thought about it alone for a moment, but still felt that this one-sided statement was too ridiculous. She could only keep it in mind for the time being. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 747. Swish swish. It was raining heavily on the small street, and the lights of the houses on both sides were turned off. It was unknown what time it was. Under the eaves of the inn, Su Buling stopped and wiped the rain off his face with his hands. It has been raining heavily since I left home. I couldn't hold an umbrella when I sneaked into Chenju's house. I was basically soaked all over. Although it didn't affect my skills, it was inevitable to feel uncomfortable, especially when I was holding a golden treasure in my hand. Little pet. Looking down, he saw that the 2-foot-long little green snake had loosened his fingers. The little green snake had been pinched by its neck for too long, and it was a little wimpy when wrapped around his arm. When it noticed him looking over, it spat out the snake letter again, with a look like "I'm very poisonous, don't touch me." Su Buling knew how powerful this little snake was, and he didn't dare to let go easily. He could only hold it like this, flew up to the second floor of the inn, and entered the wing through the window. The lights in the room were almost out, 2 pairs of embroidered shoes were neatly placed beside the bed, and the skirts were folded and placed on the stool at the head of the bed. Zhongli Chuchu had just fallen asleep after being raped and beaten by her master for half the night. Maybe she knew that Su Buling would come back, so she didn't take off her clothes completely. She was still wearing close-fitting clothes and was fast asleep facing inward, with only her snowy shoulders exposed. Zhongli Juju was sleeping outside, still holding Chu Chu's waist, maintaining a posture of seriously instructing his apprentice. Juju had already woken up before Su Buling came in, and turned her head sleepily. "Ms. Sir, we agreed for half an hour, why did you come back?" Su Buling closed the window and said with a smile, "I went to the palace and was delayed." The little sparrow was huddled in Juju's arms to keep warm. After being woken up, it shook its head and prepared to fly over to have a look. However, after discovering the menacing big green snake in Su Buling's hand, it shrank back in fear. "Cha-cha!" he shouted, as if to say, "You heartless person, why do you bring everyone into the house?" Zhongli Juju also saw the little green snake, and her fox-like eyes lit up, as if the little girl had seen the shining jewelry. She quickly sat up, without any clothes on, walked over barefoot, and said in surprise, "Ms. Sir, where did you catch it from? Did you give it to me?" "Thank you, sir." Zhongli Juju has liked to deal with birds and beasts in the mountains since he was a child. In the past, he used to attract birds and squirrels near Wudang Mountain, which greatly amazed Su Buling. He was not an ordinary fan of this rare small animal, and even Xiao Buling was very surprised. The sparrows no longer find it fragrant. Su Buling didn't dare to let go. He pinched the little green snake and carefully transferred it to Juju's hand before shaking his head and saying, "For the hostages we have captured, let the girl help us find Aunt Gui's whereabouts. If we find them, we must return them to her. If you like, I will send someone to find one for you. There should be more than one in the world." When Zhongli Juju heard this, she was obviously a little disappointed, and held the little green snake lovingly. The green hemp snake is very rare. Even if it exists, it is a life-saving weapon for people in the world. And the toxin is inexhaustible. Just like the dragon-locking poison, it is a gold nugget that can make money. It is impossible for anyone to sell it. It is in such good condition. I'm afraid there is no second rule in the world. Speaking of this, Zhongli Juju rolled his eyes and asked, "Ms. Sir, when will you go back?" "After 3 days, if she finds her whereabouts, return it to her. If she cannot find her whereabouts, return it to her when she leaves South Vietnam." Zhongli Juju nodded slightly, raised his hand and touched the little green snake's head. 3 days are enough. If my husband comes back by then, it will run back on its own, so it won't be considered as breaking its promise, right?" Su Buletinling's eyes looked a little strange, but compared to a snake, she was still more important than a stupid wife. He smiled and said, "If you can raise it to maturity in 3 days, then it will run back on its own and it will naturally have nothing to do with me." The little sparrow had been hiding in front of Chu Chu and eavesdropping. When she found out that her master had a new love, she felt a little aggrieved. He returned to Juju's shoulder and chirped a few words fiercely. The little green snake raised its head and flew back in fright. Su Buletinling looked a little funny, shook his head, took off his wet robe, sat down on the stool, and changed out of his soaked pants and boots. During the duel with Pud, Su Buletinling's right wrist guard broke and the tether was broken, and his sleeve was also damaged. After Zhongli Juju saw it, his expression changed slightly. "Are you injured? Who are you fighting with? How come there is such a powerful person in South Vietnam?" Su Buling took off the soft armor on his body and said casually, "I met Pud, one of the 7 stars of South Vietnam, and he is already dead." When Zhongli Juju heard this name, she was obviously stunned for a moment. As a Gyeongju person from South Vietnam, she was very familiar with Pud. She asked curiously. Why is Pud here? Isn't he missing? Su Buling told what Pud said from beginning to end, and then said. Anyway, it's a pretty bad thing. If Pud's words are all true, then the person who attacked me this time must be Angwo Gong Jochin, the Shangguan Kinhe of Baekong Valley. The purpose, I guess he wants to control me, and thus the Daio court. The madness of the monarch may not be as simple as excessive drinking. This Jochin has a big heart. Zhongli Jeju didn't quite understand this, so he thought for a moment. According to the statement, wouldn't the Nanu imperial court be infiltrated into a sieve by the 100 Insect Valley? What should we do now? Kill Jochin. Su Buling shook his head. Why kill him now? The traitors in the country of brothers are in power. Daio, saw it and sent troops to help the Qing Emperor of South Vietnam. It is just and reasonable. Mrs. Chen will have to thank me afterwards. Now let Jochin say, how will the Ziliang army enter the customs when they arrive in Liuzhu? Let's find out the whereabouts of Aunt Gui first, and then confirm the news. Zhongli Jeju seemed to understand, nodded, and did not ask any more questions. She carefully checked from front to back and confirmed that Su Buling was not injured, then returned to the bed, took out the small box of jewelry, put the little green snake in it, and then took out a small medicine bottle from the leg ring, poured out a valuable pill from it, and put it in the box. The little green snake struggled all the way, obviously hungry, and bit the small pill with a roar. Zhongli Jeju took this opportunity to let go and close the box, and drilled a few ventilation holes on it with a silver needle, to prevent the clever little green snake from escaping by itself. She locked the box directly and waited for tomorrow to slowly train it. The little sparrow, who was huddled in the thin quilt and watching, saw this scene and immediately became bolder. It flapped its wings and flew to the wooden box, and pecked the box with its beak, making a light dong-dong dash sound, obviously teasing the little green snake. It was a pity that before a few knocks, Jeju gave him a fierce look. The little sparrow was full of grievances, and could only jump onto Su Buling's shoulder and rub his head against it for comfort. Su Buling raised his hand and touched Yi's head, and came to the bed. He was tired after running around for half the night, and wanted to lie down, but he was troubled by the scene in the curtain. Zhongli Chuchu didn't know whether she was awake or not. Anyway, she was facing inward and motionless, as if she was sleeping soundly. Chuchu was sleeping in Jeju's room. Su Buling couldn't wake Chuchu up and send her back, but he could go out. Su Buling glanced at the side. Zhongli Jeju leaned over to toss the wooden box, originally wearing only very short safety pants, and when he bent over, it was tight, big, and round, making people really reluctant to let go. After Zhongli Jeju put the little green snake away, he turned around and discovered this problem. She walked up to him and gently nudged Su Buling with her shoulder. "What are you thinking about? Do you want us, the master and the apprentice, to serve you together?" Su Buling certainly wanted to, but it was impossible now. Chuchu was obviously pretending to sleep, and he would be furious if he dared to mess with her. He hugged Jeju's waist and turned to the door. "Let's go, let's sleep next door." Zhongli Jeju naturally understood what her husband meant. She glanced at Chuchu and her face turned red, but she couldn't resist her husband's temptation. She hesitated for a moment, but still followed Su Buling out the door obediently. Not long after, the swaying creaking sound of old furniture came from the room separated by a wall. On the bed, Zhongli Chuchu opened her eyes. Her eyes were unusually strange. She had woken up a long time ago, but she didn't get up because she didn't want to talk to Su Buling. At this time, listening to the sound next to her, Zhongli Chuchu's face became redder and redder, her breathing was slightly unstable, and she felt very uncomfortable and suffocated. Zhongli Chuchu endured for a long time, and it was really uncomfortable. She raised her hand and knocked on the wall twice, then turned over, covered her cheek with a thin blanket, and said in a muffled voice, "It's late at night, can't you let me sleep?" "Chu-chu, master is treating his injuries, and will be back soon, woo. Today is very bad, my mind is empty, this chapter was written last night, and I haven't typed a word from 4 o'clock to now. I'm writing it now. If I can write it, I will update it tomorrow during the day. If I can't write it, I will update it tomorrow night. I'm really sorry. The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 748. The next day, the rain did not stop. On Gaifei Street, the old tavern that had been open for business before dawn for 20 years was closed. Most of the shops on the street were closed, which should not have attracted attention. But the civil and military officials and the common people who passed by the old tavern glanced at it in confusion, thinking that something was wrong, but they couldn't tell what the problem was. After frowning and thinking carefully, they remembered that there was no waiter sitting on a stool in a daze outside the door of this tavern. Just like there is a tree on the way home, coming and going for 20 years, from the prime of life to the old man with gray hair, passing by the tree every day, and not paying attention to it. Only when the tree is gone, will you feel that something is missing. But whether it is a tree or a waiter, they are all insignificant things. After a glance, pedestrians hurried past. The mansion opposite the old tavern opened its gate at dawn, and the guards filed out. The second prince, Chenju, rode a sedan chair to the palace to attend court as usual. Chenju didn't pay attention at first. He got on the sedan chair with the help of the guards. Just as he bent over to enter the carriage, he suddenly stopped and looked at the old tavern. There were 2 doors opposite each other. Since the day Chenju moved in, he could see the waiter opposite every morning. In the morning when the court was in session, the waiter would wipe the table in the window. When he saw him, he would smile respectfully. He couldn't remember how many years it lasted. Chenju frowned and looked away for a long time until the guard reminded him that he would miss the time for court. He came to his senses. After all, he was just a waiter. State affairs were ahead and he couldn't delay. Chenju retracted his gaze, leaned into the carriage, and said calmly, "Let's go." The carriage slowly left in the rain, everything was normal. Not long after, the old shopkeeper came to open the door, saw the scene inside, and ran out again in fear. Then Shangguan Jinghong came with people, carried a cloth bag and left, and sent it to the imperial concubine's tomb. By noon, the old tavern had returned to its usual appearance. No one would pay attention to this insignificant little thing, because the story of the old tavern had already ended last night. The sky was overcast and rainy, making the city more desolate. The civil and military officials entered the palace in an orderly manner and began a day of court meetings. The topics of discussion were all focused on the fact that the Ziliang army marched to the southern border for no reason. The monarch Chenjin, who was supposed to sit in the court and make decisions, obviously couldn't sit in the chair that belonged to him at this time. In the rain, Chen Xining walked out of Fuan Palace, still with a bit of annoyance on her face, but this time, she obviously couldn't complain to the nanny like a chatterbox. Thinking of what happened last night, Chen Xining felt itchy. After Su Buling left, she remembered that she didn't wear clothes before going to bed, and asked the nanny to wipe the wound on her chest. That evil thief had been hiding behind the wooden frame, and he must have feasted his eyes and seen everything clean. When he came out, he even pretended to be "Don't look at anything indecent. It's okay to look at her," and he also kidnapped Ah Ching. Ah Ching has been spoiled since she was a child and is the most precious. If she is tormented by a wild man for 3 days, she will lose half her life if she doesn't die. Just thinking about it makes me feel distressed. While secretly thinking, Chen Xining walked through the harem for a long time and came to Chen Jin's bedroom. Outside the bedroom, The few palace maids stayed in their respective positions, repeating the hopeless days. The eunuch stood outside the bedroom, bowed and stood quietly, as if he didn't hear the cries in the hall. After all, he had heard them for several years and had gotten used to it. Chen Xining asked the maids to wait outside and pushed open the door alone. Inside the hall, Chen Jin was still lying on the sick bed, looking like a dry bone, with faint sobs coming out of her mouth, and it was unknown how much pain she was enduring. As a daughter, Chen Xining had never spoken much to her father since she was a child, but the blood relationship was thicker than water, so she was worried. She walked slowly to the bed and looked at her father carefully. Chen Jin's eyes were cloudy and dull, and he didn't seem to notice his daughter next to him. He just opened and closed his lips and made an inaudible cry. Chen Xining remembered what the man said last night and her own guess. After a little hesitation, she knelt in front of the bed and said, "Father, have you been poisoned? If so, just blink your eyes." Chen Jin didn't react at all. Only when facing Chen Ju would she awaken a little bit of consciousness. For this daughter, she might have even forgotten who she was. Chen Xining's eyes were obviously a little disappointed. She felt that her thoughts were a little naive. After staying with him for a long time, she got up and left the bedroom. While walking, Chen Xining kept thinking about the conversation last night. She didn't believe what that person said. After all, those unfounded words were too exaggerated. If Zhou Qin, the Duke of Angguo, who had worked in the court for 20 years, was a member of the 100 Insects Valley, what would be left of the Nanya court? He would just become a puppet of the 100 Insects Valley. Zhou Qin's resume was very clear. The people of Lingshan County still remember the former magistrate Zhou. Sometimes his classmates from that year would come to the capital to seek refuge. Zhou Qin's official career was not as clean as water, but he never embezzled or accepted bribes. He assisted Chen Ju in handling government affairs. Although he did not make Nanya soar, at least the internal affairs were well organized and there was no major chaos. He was considered the backbone of the Nanya court. Zhou Qin was already an old man in his 60s. In a few years, when Chen Ju inherited the throne, he should retire and return home. It is nonsense to say that the old minister who has worked diligently and contributed his whole life to the court of Nanya is a gangster and tycoon in the underworld. He has reached the highest position in the country, so how could he have the time to hang out in the underworld? What is the point? Chen Xining thought about it and felt that the man yesterday must have been deliberately creating confusion, but Ah Qing was in that man's hands, so he couldn't just ignore it, and he had to check the traces of the 5 missing people. After thinking for a long time alone, Chen Xining dismissed the palace maids, changed into warrior clothes, and left the imperial city alone. Duke Angguo Zhou Qin now assists the Prince Chen Ju in governing. If there is any top-secret information in South Vietnam, it must be placed in Zhou Qin's study. However, Chen Xining also kept a watchful eye. If Zhou Qin is really Shangguan Qin, if she dares to enter the study, the person must be gone. For safety reasons, Chen Xining went directly to Chen Ju's house, opposite the old tavern. Chen Ju was attending court in the palace at this time, and most of the guards were taken away, so the defense of the house was sparse. Chen Xining often came to nag, and even knew the secret room in the study, so she was naturally very clear about the defense of the house. Moreover, Chen Ju handled the government affairs on his behalf, so he must have known a lot of information. Although the matter of the 5 border people was too small to appear in Chen Ju's study, it was better to find something than to wander around like a headless fly. Chen Xining covered her face with a veil and walked into the back alley with an oil paper umbrella. She came to a place where there were no secret guards. After looking around for a few times, she entered the mansion as light as a swallow, came to the back house with familiarity, and entered directly from the back window of the study. The door of the study was closed, and there were guards walking outside. There was no one in the room. The table was tidy, and memorials, letters, books, etc. were neatly arranged on the bookshelf next to it. Chen Xining often came here and was familiar with these things, but she had never flipped through these things without authorization. She came to the bookshelf lightly and found the matters reported by officials from all over the country recently. Nanyu is still a large area from Fuzhou in the east to Jiaozhai in the west. The things that can be sent to the study are naturally not trivial matters such as stealing chickens and dogs. Most of them are about taxes, water conservancy, farming in various places, and rebellions in some places. Chen Xining found the memorial sent by the prefect of Liuzhu, but after a quick glance, it did not even mention the small place of Fei Shuiling. It only reported that the overall situation of the Ziliang army outside the pass moved to the south, and how many able-bodied men were captured, etc. Chen Xining first found all the case files sent by Liuzhu in the past 3 months and checked them one by one, but from beginning to end, she could not find any records about Fei Shuiling, which made her feel a little headache. How could she check such a small matter? This matter should be run to the prefectural government office in Liuzhu and search in the treasury. How could she find clues in this place? However, the pet was still in the hands of others, so Chen Xining had to check it. At that time, she had to check all the files from beginning to end. Although she did not find any news related to Fei Shuiling from beginning to end, when she turned to the files of Qinzhou, Chen Xining narrowed her eyes slightly and said softly. The case file was submitted more than a month ago. The matter was neither big nor small. It said that a hunter in Qinzhou was hunting in Yulongling and saw an unidentified person escorting 5 old and young women and children into the deep mountains. After reporting to the authorities, he sent a constable to investigate, but he never came back. He requested the capital to send someone to investigate. Chen Xining remembered the description of the man last night and felt that the two things might be related. He picked up the file and flipped through it, but it already had the result sent to Chenzhou by the Court of Justice. The capital had sent elite troops to Qinzhou to investigate, and there was nothing unusual. The constable died of miasma, and the person the hunter saw was also buried there. Qinzhou borders Yangzhou, and Yulongling is 100 miles away in the east, located between high mountains. It is said that there is miasma in it, and birds, beasts and hunters who died of poisoning have been found in the mountains before. There was nothing wrong with the whole thing, but Chen Xining always felt that something was a little strange, mainly because the sentence "the suspicious person took 5 old and young women and children" was only explained with "all died of miasma," without explaining the relationship at all, and even the identity was not found out. Chen Xining thought about it and felt that this was a very critical information. After carefully writing it down, he put the file back to its original place. After making sure that there was no trace left, he quietly left the study. "I just finished writing yesterday today. No money. Give you cash or points, limited to 1 day to receive. Follow the public account Book Friends Base Camp to receive it for free." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 749. It has been raining for 2 consecutive days, the weather is getting colder and colder, and the streets and alleys are gradually deserted of pedestrians. It was raining and it was inconvenient to go out. In the private room on the 2nd floor of the inn, Su Buletinling meditated on the bed to regulate his inner breath. Master Zhongli and his apprentice were sitting at a round table, with 3 small animals in front of them. There were some purchased precious medicinal materials on the round table, and Zhongli Jiju carefully prepared the food that the green hemp snake liked. As a witch who grew up in the mountains, Zhongli Jiju naturally likes to communicate with various animals and understands the habits of various animals far better than ordinary people. Just like people, everyone likes to eat meat, but their preferred cooking methods and types of meat are different. People who usually keep animals only know that snakes like to eat rats, birds, and frogs, but it is difficult to figure out what kind of snakes, rats, and frogs a snake likes. Zhongli Jiju is very good at this, and soon after getting along with Little Green Snake, he understood all of Little Green Snake's preferences. After 2 days of contact, under Jeju's careful care, the Little Green Snake has lost its vigilance when it was caught by Su Buling. Now it is coiled on the table, raising its green little head, spitting out the snake letter, and saying seriously, staring at Jeju's hand. The little sparrow obviously hated this broken snake that suddenly came over to compete for its favor, but the sparrow itself was on the snake's menu, and it didn't dare to get close to it, so it could only stand on the other side of the table aggrievedly, and let the dragon locking goo lie on it. He acts as a bodyguard in front of him, and then glares fiercely at Green Snake. The only natural enemy of locking dragon goo is other locking dragon goo. There is no other creature in the world that it cannot catch up with but cannot defeat. Naturally, he has no interest in intervening in the conflict between the two younger brothers. He just lays down in the middle innocently as a dividing line. Zhongli Chuchu had no talent in this area since she was a child, so she could only watch. Maybe she felt a little bored, so she raised her hand to pick up Yi and gently rubbed her furry head to relieve her boredom. The little sparrow was already unhappy, and after being rubbed twice it became even more hopeless. She could only secretly miss the warm-hearted nightingale in her heart. Zhongli Jiju concentrated on abducting the little green snake, but found that his apprentice was a little bored. After thinking about it, he turned his head and looked at Su Buling beside him. Ms. Gong, you and Chu Chu should take Yi out for a walk after staying in the house for 2 days, she is almost sick. Su Buling couldn't get close to his wife for fear of scaring the little green snake. In fact, he was a little bored. At this time, he stood up and looked at Chu Chu. Let's go out and relax. Zhongli Chuchu was afraid of being hugged and kissed by Su Buling, so she dared not be alone with Su Buling. She shook her head, it's raining and I don't want to go out. You just take it with you. The little sparrow had been stunned for a long time. Seeing this, it quickly flapped its wings and chirped. Maybe he was afraid that the green snake would kidnap Chong Chong while it was out, and then flew to the table, grabbed the dragon locking goo, and prepared to put it in Su Buling's hand and go out together. Su Buling was frightened by the dragon locking goo. How could he dare to take it? Moreover, the dragon locking goo was something Jeju could use to save his life. Naturally, he couldn't take it away. After comforting the little sparrow twice, he picked up his umbrella and went out. It was raining outside the window. As Su Buling left, the room became quieter and the atmosphere changed slightly. Zhongli Chuchu sat up a little straighter, hugged his chest, and looked at the master opposite him with a somewhat scrutinizing look. Since coming to South Vietnam, Zhongli Chuchu has discovered that the master's face is getting thicker and thicker. He used to sneak around and carry her behind his back, but now it's good. Seeing that she relaxed a little, he just let himself go. When the time comes in the evening, I went back to the house with Su Buling, and then spent half the night talking. I live next door. For safety reasons, even the bed was moved to the wall, so that in case of crisis, I could break through the wall and come to rescue. There was a palm-thick wooden board between them, and it could be said that even Su Buling's breathing could be heard clearly. It was no different from the two people lying around and messing around. After all, Zhongli Chuchu was also an eldest daughter who had not left the court. She couldn't bear to stay up like this every night. She finally fell asleep and dreamed of some unspeakable things. When she woke up this morning, she found that her underwear was soaked. Having been so tortured physically and mentally, Zhongli Chuchu could be said to be holding back a lot of resentment. At this time, the eyes he looked at his master were becoming more and more unkind. Zhongli Jiju put the prepared pills into the little green snake's mouth, which was waiting to be fed. Gradually, she noticed something was wrong in Chu Chu's eyes. She felt slightly tense, raised her head, and said with a smile. Chu, what's wrong? Read books and get cash. Follow the VX public account Book Friends Basecamp and read books and get cash. Zhongli took a deep breath, pondered for a moment, and then said seriously. Master, you are now a married woman. You are no longer a Jianghu girl from South Vietnam. I come from a prince's family and follow rules and etiquette. The affairs of the boudoir are never mentioned on the table. It's good for you. You do that every night, ugh. It's hard to describe in one word. Zhongli Jeju pursed her lips and said, what is so important about passing on the family line that cannot be brought to the fore? Zhongli Chuchu narrowed his eyes slightly, what about carrying on the family line? You and Su Buling are messing around every day, and I don't see any movement in your stomach. You are obviously addicted to male sex. It's just addiction. It's inconvenient for us to travel around the world. Not at home or on the boat. Can't you pay attention to me while I'm still sleeping next to you? Zhongli Jeju smiled coquettishly, I'm paying attention. Su Buling covers my mouth every time, just for fear of being heard by you. What's the use of covering your mouth? The bed is moving. Zhongli Chuchu, a yellow-flowered girl, said that she really shouldn't care about such things. She didn't even blush when she saw her master smashing the pot, so she had no choice but to turn her head away and sulk after her chest rose and fell a few times. Zhongli Jeju found that her disciple stopped talking about her, and she was a little proud in her heart. She raised her eyelids and whispered. Chuchu, don't just talk about me, you are listening very seriously, aren't you? Zhongli Chuchu was stunned, turned around, and said with a little annoyance, you are so noisy, it's useless to cover your ears, can I not listen? Zhongli Jeju smiled softly, just listen, why are you humming along? Do you have a stomachache in the middle of the night? Master. You. Zhongli Chuchu's face suddenly turned red, and she couldn't sit still anymore. She got up and ran back to her room. Although it was raining, there were still caravans on the main road of Chaohuang Street. Su Buling was holding an oil paper umbrella and wandering aimlessly on the street with a fat little sparrow. If he held a folding fan and followed two lackeys behind him, he would be considered a standard dandy in the capital. It was said that they were going out for a walk, but it was raining and difficult to fly. The little sparrow squatted on the shoulder obediently, looking left and right. When it came across a small shop selling melon seeds and dried fruits, it would use its furry head to rub Su Buling's neck to please him. The scene looked like a concubine who had been oppressed by the eldest wife for too long at home, and finally went out alone with the master. Su Buling bought some dried fruits that were special products of South Vietnam, put them in his sleeves, and peeled and crushed them from time to feed one. Walking along Chaohuang Street, I wanted to find an opportunity to enter the imperial city to see what news Chen Si-ning had inquired about, but before I got to the imperial city, I saw Chen Si-ning sitting in a carriage and coming from the main road. Chen Si-ning herself was very good at martial arts, and basically did not need guards when she went out. She only brought two strong women who drove the car to sit outside. The carriage did not seem to be in a hurry to travel, but just walked slowly on the street. The window was open, and Chen Si-ning poked her cheek out from inside, looking carefully at the pedestrians on both sides of the street, as if looking for something. The attractive face and peach blossom eyes that were comparable to Su Buling's were quite eye-catching in the rain, but everyone in the capital knew who the carriage belonged to, so no one looked at it casually. When Su Buling saw this scene, he knew that Chen Si-ning must be looking for him, but he didn't know how to contact him, so he wandered around the street in this way, waiting for him to show up. After checking the surroundings and confirming that it was not a bait or a trap, Su Buling stood at the entrance of an alley, holding an umbrella and looking at Chen Si-ning. Warriors are highly alert and will be wary when being stared at directly. After Chen Si-ning noticed someone staring at her, she turned her eyes to the street alley, but the scene she saw made her stunned for a moment, In the rain, a handsome man stood quietly with an oil paper umbrella, wearing a white robe and a jade hairpin on his head. He was almost spotless from head to toe, with a pair of seductive peach blossom eyes, smiling but with a bit of cold temperament that kept people away. Just by looking at his appearance, one can imagine the scene of a noble and lonely scholar reading by lamplight at night, and not saying a word to the beautiful woman. So handsome. Chen Xining had seen handsome men before, but this was definitely the first time she had seen such a handsome man. Chen Xining met Su Buletinling twice. The first time, Su Buletinling was dressed as a native of South Vietnam and had a big beard, so she didn't see him clearly in a hurry. The second time was in the palace, and he covered his face from head to toe. At this time, when she suddenly saw Su Buletinling in the appearance of a scholar, Chen Xining really didn't recognize him at first. After all, just looking at this tall figure, many people believe that he is well educated, but he doesn't look like a martial arts master. Chen Xining instinctively looked away at first, walked a little forward, and saw that the white-clothed scholar was staring at her, so she looked over again, and then saw that the white-clothed scholar raised his hand and flicked his finger, just flicking a drop of raindrops falling from the umbrella ribs. SSS. A slight sound of breaking wind was heard, and the raindrops hit the window, turning into mist and disappearing without a trace. Good kung fu. Chen Xining was naturally confirmed this time, closed the window, let the carriage continue to move, then got off the carriage in a secluded place and walked quickly to the alley. After Su Buling reminded Chen Xining, he turned into an empty alley, put away the umbrella under the eaves, looked up at the rain curtain in front of him, and waited quietly. In a moment, Chen Xining, with a silver moon scimitar and a long whip hanging on his back, covered his head with his hands and ran over. She was wearing a blue outer skirt with a white lining. It was raining heavily, and she didn't hold an umbrella, so she ran fast. However, because she was wrapped in a bra, her chest didn't look rough. Chen Xining stopped under the eaves of the next house, keeping a distance of more than 10 steps. She put her right hand on the hilt of the knife, and looked at Su Buling cautiously, looking him up and down, as if to say, "Who are you, handsome guy? The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 750. Su Buletinling carried the umbrella behind him, looked up at the rain curtain falling from the eaves, and said casually, "It's me, didn't you recognize it?" Chen Xining really didn't recognize it. She looked at Su Buling's profile, looked up and down for a long time, then frowned and said, "Aren't you a meow from the mountains? When traveling around the world, you have to dress up a little to hide your identity. You can change your appearance, but you can't change your temperament and conversation. You look more like you come from a noble family. Who are you?" Su Buling turned his head and showed a smile. "There's nothing I can do about my natural beauty. Besides, I'm from Jianghu, so I don't have to live in a meow village all the time. Let's get down to business." Chen Xining couldn't figure out the details of Su Buling. Now that he had a trump card, he naturally became more courageous, and his habit of being a talkative was also committed. "Since you have a grievance and ask me to help with something, you have to explain the details clearly. Even if it is not convenient to reveal your identity, you can at least tell me your name and contact information. I have been wandering around the street since the day before yesterday, walking back and forth like a fool. My grandma even suspected that I had a demonic disorder, so she called the medical lady last night to examine me." Su Buling looked a little helpless and introduced himself. "My name is Su Shanshan, and I am nicknamed Eagle Finger Sanren. I used to walk around in the Jianghu in the Central Plains, and I would only come back to deal with things when something happened in Phi Shui Ridge. Is that enough?" Twinkle. Chen Xining was dubious, feeling that the name was not worthy of the appearance and martial arts. With so much immortal energy, it would be more appropriate to call him Su Xian. However, Chen Xining discovered that there was something fishy in the file, which at least proved that half of Su Buling's hardships were true. Naturally, his impression of Su Buling improved a bit. He just regarded Su Buling as a knight-errant who took risks to save his relatives and friends, and did not ask any further questions at the moment. Nodded, and said, "Su, Mr. Su seems to be a man of rules, not like a villain in the world. You came to my dormitory a few days ago. You didn't look at anything, right?" This statement is a bit judgmental. Su Buling took it seriously. Just looking at his appearance, he was indeed no different from a frigid person. It was easy for girls to regard him as a true gentleman who did not eat the fireworks of the world. However, although Su Buling is not a womanizer, he did not do any dirty things like peeping in the palace last time, so he naturally has a clear conscience at this time. "Princess, there is no need to worry too much. I still understand that a gentleman should not look at anything inappropriate." Chen Xining secretly breathed a sigh of relief and stretched out her left hand. "You return Ah Ching to me first, and then I'll tell you the news." The little sparrow squatting on Su Buling's shoulder poked out its little head from under its neck after hearing this, and chirped twice, as if to say, "Take that broken snake away quickly. My master likes the new and hates the old, and he doesn't love me either." Before Su Buling could respond, Chen Xining was slightly startled when she saw the little sparrow, and then showed a surprised look. "This is the Yunfa mountain spirit. Isn't it extinct? Where did you find it?" Yunfa mountain spirit naturally refers to a type of small sparrow that is only found in the Yunfa mountain area of South Vietnam and is considered a rare animal. Su Buling knew that the sparrows raised by Jeju were carefully selected from thousands of species, but he had not asked about the specific species. This was the first time he heard the name. Su Buletinling thought for a while, then made a learned attitude, with a slight look of approval in his eyes. "Princess has good eyesight." Chen Xining took a closer look and confirmed that it was the rare bird species that she had read about in the book, and then felt a little relieved. Someone who could raise such a delicate bird well would definitely not be as messy as a rough man when raising a king. At least can't be raised to death. Chen Xining looked at Su Buling a few times. "You didn't bring Ah Ching with you, where is it? Don't have money to read novels? You will receive cash or points for a limited time of 1 day. Follow the public account book Friends Base Camp and get it for free. If you leave it at your accommodation and be raised by a dedicated person, there will never be any problems. It will be delivered to the princess later." Chen Xining frowned slightly, not believing this. It would be fine if he were an ordinary person. He doesn't understand the value of Ah Ching at all. If he can raise such a precious sparrow as an assistant, it is impossible not to covet Ah Ching. Chen Xining's eyes were suspicious, but she couldn't speak directly. Su Buling naturally understood what Chen Xining meant. He did not bring the green snake, so he could only spread his hands at this time. "If you don't believe me, girl, please wait here for a while and I'll bring Ah Ching over." Chen Xining naturally agreed with this proposal and nodded. "It's not that I don't trust the young master, but the young master is a Jianghu person. Jianghu people follow the rules and pay the money with one hand and deliver the goods with the other hand, huh? Where are the people?" In the blink of an eye, Chen Xining saw that the eaves next to her were empty. If it weren't for the traces of water left on the ground from the umbrella sliding down, she would have thought that it was all an illusion. "Hey, this guy." Chen Xining and Lu Ye frowned, with doubts in their eyes. She felt that this martial arts was a bit too exaggerated. He is so handsome, has such high martial arts skills, and looks like a scholar. Could it be that he is the son of Mei Chu, the son of Mei Chu in the Central Plains? No, Mei Kushan used a sword. This guy seemed to have used a straight knife last time. Chen Xining secretly pondered that within half a quarter of an hour, there was a noise from the side of the alley. Su Buletinling held an umbrella and fluttered down from the eaves. He held a leather glove in his right hand and pinched the 7 inches of the little green snake. The little green snake didn't bite Su Buling's finger this time, but it didn't seem very happy. It kept staring at Su Buling. After discovering Chen Xining, it quickly became active again, twisting and twisting to try to run past. The white snake that was in Chen Xining's sleeve also poked its head out at this time, spitting out a pink snake letter, looking worried and excited. When Chen Xining saw that Ching was intact, her eyes became a little more happy and she stretched out her hand. "Thank you, Master, for taking care of me today. Please, don't squeeze me so tightly." They are more than 10 steps apart from each other and under 2 eaves. In order to prevent Chen Xining from being alert, Su Buling did not get close to Chen Xining. He just bent over and put the little green snake on the ground, then quickly let go and pushed it 2 steps away. The little green snake swooped across the eaves and ran to Chen Xining's feet. As if it was home, it got under Chen Xining's skirt and climbed up. Chen Xining's expression was slightly stiff, and her face turned visibly red. Fortunately, her skirt was wide, and she couldn't see Ching's movements crawling along her legs and into her sleeves. Su Buling felt a little funny in his heart and didn't stare at it. He just said with a smile, "Can we talk now?" Chen Xining retracted her hands in her sleeves, comforted the little green snake who was not very aggrieved, and said seriously, "I found something in the file. Last month in Qinzhou, a hunter saw a suspicious person escorting 5 old, young, women and children into the mountains in Yulong Ridge. The police went to investigate and found out whether they had gone back. Tingui Mansion elites from Beijing were sent to investigate, and the reply was that all died from the miasma. The identities of the 5 old, young, women and children were not determined. Qinzhou is the place where the remnants of Beikong Valley are most active, and there have been many unsolved cases of people missing for no reason. I have always wondered where the lair of Beikong Valley is hidden. If someone from Beikong Valley really attacked you, they would probably have sent them to Yulong Ridge." Su Buling listened carefully and nodded slightly. "Where did you get the news?" Chen Xining knew that Su Buling was suspicious of Zhou Qin and Chen Zhu, so she shook her head and said, "My brother Wang and Dukan Guo cannot possibly have anything to do with Beikagu. Even if they do, these messages are files submitted by Tinggui's mansion, stamped with the seal of Tinggui's mansion. My brother Wang is just checking them on behalf of my father. I have not succeeded to the throne and cannot interfere with the duties of the 3 ministers and 9 ministers. If there is a problem, it will only be caused by the police officers from the capital who came to check. This must have happened." Su Buling knew that Zhou Qin was the boss of Baichong Valley, and he had infiltrated the Nanyu imperial court into a sieve. He had no confidence in the judicial institutions of the Nanyu imperial court. However, there are currently no other clues. Yang Tuyu has led 20,000 Ziliang troops and artillery to the vicinity of Liuzhu. If Aunt Gui's whereabouts is not found, there will be no chance to find her slowly when the war starts. At the moment, I could only nod slightly. I will verify the authenticity of the news. Thank you for your help, Her Royal Highness. Chen Xining smiled, "You don't need to thank me. There is something fishy in the file. Even without you, I will check it if I know it. Beikong Valley is a serious problem for me in South Vietnam, and Qinzhou is the place where the remnants of Beikong Valley are most active. Sikongji taking action against you means that this matter is closely related to Baichong Valley. If you follow this clue, you might be able to find the lair of Baichong Valley. How about I go check it out with you? As long as I have my identity, you can do what you want. Much more convenient." Su Buling was being plotted by the South Vietnamese court. How could he take the South Vietnamese princess and run to find the hostages captured by South Vietnam? This was not looking for trouble for himself. He shook his head and said, "This matter has nothing to do with the princess. I have always been a loner and don't like to act with others. This is the end of our relationship, and we are destined." Su Buling wanted to say that they would meet again by fate, but judging from the current situation, the Ziliang army would soon arrive at the city. If the Chen family did not surrender and submit, the next time the two of them met, they would most likely capture the Chen family and take them to Chang'an. It's time for the city. Speaking of which, this scene is really not something people want to see. Su Buling hesitated for a moment, then changed his words. Let's forget about each other and say goodbye. Chen Shining saw that Su Buling refused to agree. Since there was no way to restrict Su Buling, there was nothing she could do. Anyway, she likes to be alone when investigating cases, so she raised her hand and made a quaint salute. See you again if we are destined. After Su Buling raised his hands and clasped his fists, he disappeared behind the house next to the alley in a flash. Chen Shining watched the figure in white clothes and snow leave holding an oil paper umbrella. She stood there and thought for a moment, feeling that this inexplicable encounter was quite interesting. It felt like a chivalrous story told by a storyteller. However, they were not familiar with each other after all. Chen Shining still suffered a lot, and she didn't have much emotion in her heart. She turned towards the entrance of the alley, took out the little green snake, and said with concern. King, have you suffered these days? Has he bullied you? The little green snake stuck out its little head and touched the white snake next to it. There was no strange emotion, just as if it had been out playing for 2 days. Seeing this, Chen Shining felt even more relieved. Although she complained about Su Buling beating her and threatening her, she still secretly sighed, he is still a pretty reliable man. Chen Shining was naturally very concerned that the pet he regarded as a treasure was lost and found. He was afraid that the little green snake would not eat well, so he took out 2 of his own small ball rations from his arms and placed them in the palm of his hand. The small round balls are snacks that reward interest. They are used for daily training. Chen Shining asked for the secret recipe. As long as she takes them out, the eyes of the 2 little snakes will light up. She also has to prevent the 2 little guys from fighting over them. At this time, the little white snake was the same as before. It went up and took a slurp and held it in its mouth. It also rubbed its head against Chen Shining's hand. As before, Qing quickly bit down on the small ball, but after holding it in his mouth, he was stunned for a moment, then spat it out, looking at Chen Shining, feeling a little aggrieved. Chen Shining was puzzled and looked at it carefully. Aren't you hungry? Are you still angry and don't want to eat? Qing felt his master's doubts, hesitated for a moment, lowered his head, took the small ball into his mouth, and swallowed it. That's right. Chen Shining nodded in satisfaction, patted Qing's little head, and walked briskly back to the carriage.